And just like that, the first half of the season is in the books. Welcome in Tough Fantasy Baseball today on Monday, July 10th. I am Frank Stampfl, joined by Chris the Welsh. And as I mentioned last week, we have some unique programming coming your way throughout the All-Star break, starting with today. Speaking of which, what are we talking about? Recapping the first round of the MLB Draft, taking an early look at first-year player draft rankings for those who play in Dynasty Leagues. And I realize not everybody plays in a Dynasty League, but I think it's important for us to learn about these players as soon as possible because some of them could be impact names as soon as next season. I mean, I don't think we'll see any of them this year, but crazier things have happened.
There's a chance.
There's a chance. That's why I think we need to dive in. We've got to learn about these guys because they are going to be making an impact soon. Before we get started, please like this video and subscribe on YouTube if you haven't already. And if you're listening on the audio side, download, follow, and leave a 5-star rating on Apple or Spotify. Welshie, how's the weekend, bud?
What's up, Frank? I've just been getting ready for this, not being at the All-Star game, which there was this like little chance I was going to. So a little depressed, but you know, it was made okay by watching the Futures game. Everybody was out there. I had some predictions that came true, by the way. I'd said Jacob Misiorowski was going to shock everybody and everyone was going to talk about him. And like a glove, he was out there just slanging and looking great. So the Futures game, though, I know some people were kind of like, oh, it was a little disappointing. It was pretty awesome to see all those guys on display. You got to see some of the tools. And then obviously the MLB draft. And, you know, thanks to you and our great Eric K and EK and all the guys that pushed to have me on. If anyone didn't see, I was on CBS Sports HQ, which was with Larry Ridley, which was very fun talking about and breaking down some of the picks if anyone was watching live. So very happy to do that. And I'm very happy to be in my home setting with you, Frank.
Yeah, did a great job. I was watching some of that too because I wanted to get some instant analysis and learn about these players as well. So great job there. And speaking of Misiorowski, you know who has him in the Scout White Dynasty League, don't you, Welsh?
So lame. So lame. So lame.
So yeah, I saw his line. I saw what he did, and I saw some people raving about him. So we'll talk about on tomorrow's podcast. We'll have impact prospects for the second half of the season. We'll also talk about the Futures game a little bit and what went down there. But let's jump in. Let's just talk about the MLB Draft recap. Before we get into player specifics, let's just quickly explain how the MLB Draft is different, in my opinion, than other sports, because I think it's a very unique experience, a very unique draft, because the biggest thing that I've noticed is that teams don't always draft the best player available. Sometimes they'll take a player that's perceived to be a lesser talent or lower down the rankings, though I don't know that anyone really knows. I mean, some of these guys are projected so far out. It's really hard to know, but they do that so that they could sign these players in the first round for less money, underslot as they'll call it, and then they have more money to spend later on in the draft. Does that make sense? Well, should I explain that correctly? Anything else you'd like to add on just, I guess, the politics that go in behind the MLB draft?
It's kind of like espionage. It's like Mission Impossible 7 is out. So it's just like Tom Cruise behind the scene. It's very espionage-y because it's very like smoke screen and this and that. Like basketball and football, it's just meat and potatoes. It's like you take the guy, this is what you pay. There's nothing really crazy. The last person I can think of that there was like a contract thing was with Michael Crabtree. Remember that with the 49ers? There's some weird, like he didn't want to sign until really late and blah, blah, blah. That's just rare. That's not in the MLB draft. First off, you can't trade picks. That's actually the most apparent thing. They did change where you can start to trade, I think, compensatory picks, but you can't trade your normal picks. And then exactly what you said, there's so many rounds. And then there is this politicking that happens where there are teams that are just cheap. And then there are teams that want to spend other places. You don't see like second round NFL picks getting like $1 million over what that slot is, but you see that in baseball. Last year, Brock Porter got, I think his slot price was like a couple $100,000 and he got multiple millions of dollars when the Rangers took Kumar Rocker and he took less. We've just seen all these weird things have happened over time. And this draft was ripe with it, man. We were littered with it. The Orioles always get the rap of the team that are going to try to save money. By the way, they took one of my favorite players in this draft, this one. But the Pirates were all about this. Every rumor was they're going to go under slot. They're going to take Wyatt Langford for actual slot money. They're going to take Max Clark to save $1 million to sign one of these high school shortstops later on. So that's the weird thing that happens with this, like you said, is you've now got the situation where teams will not take the best player so they can persuade a maybe high school player to not go into college, and they'll pay him more money. And you'll even see, this is the other weird thing, not to keep going on about this, but you'll see a team like this situation that happened with Brock Porter. You'll see a team come to a agreement, and then their agents, they'll tell all the teams, and all the teams will pass. So it's like you can finagle the draft a little bit, which is super weird. Baseball is odd, and this was the first year we also got the rookie compensation. So Julio Rodriguez, who, remember the new rules, it's like if a rookie who's a top 100 prospect is on the opening day roster and then also wins rookie of the year or is in, top 3 in voting of like Cy Young or MVP, they're eligible for a pick. The Mariners did that. And that was, I believe, the 29th pick in this draft, which ended up being, I'm forgetting who it was now. It was not Ty Pete. It was Johnny Farmelo. Johnny Farmelo ended up being the first player ever to be the extra rookie compensation. We'll see the Diamondbacks get that next year with Corbin Carroll. So yes, there's actually a lot different about baseball. Is a wacky, weird one, but it's pretty fun if you can get through all the, the Mission Impossible, the da 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 da. Frank, ba-da-da.
I find it fascinating, man. I really do. And to be totally honest, I didn't really know much about the MLB draft until I started working here at CBS. I think my first year working here was 2020, right? It was the COVID shutdown. It was only a 5-round draft, and there wasn't really anything else going on. There was no baseball games going on. So I was like, all right, let's do some programming around the MLB draft. So started to learn about it then and just slowly kind of built up over the years. But yeah, I find it absolutely fascinating when it comes to the MLB draft. And sticking there, Welsh, how would you describe this draft in particular? Is it a loaded draft? I mean, I've heard, the top 5 picks in this draft, they could have been number 1 overall picks in like any other draft. So how would you describe this draft? Is it loaded? Is there a lot of like proximity guys? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it was loaded on the top. And I would say there are 4 players that in the majority of other drafts could have been number 1. I probably would take Walker Jenkins out of that. But, some might argue it. It's very hitter talented. It's very deep hitter talented. It's not super pitching heavy. We've actually had a couple of those. There's a few college arms that were elite towards the top. That's why we ended up seeing, I believe, if I'm doing the math correctly, if it was 4, I think 4 in the top 10 ended up being pitchers. Then we kind of had a reprieve of that. But this is a deep hitting class. There's some good top end talent, which is probably going to be exactly how we treat first-year player drafts in fantasy for dynasty and prospect leagues. It's like having a top 3-4 pick is going to be, especially 3 specifically, is going to be really nice because it's all, my top 3 are college guys. And then it's going to kind of pare down, but there's a lot of talent out there. And I've got, as you've seen on my first-year player list, I've got a guy or 2 that is in the 2nd round or hasn't even been drafted that I kind of presume is a top 25. I also have a player that was drafted in the 20s who is a top 6 first-year player. So first-year players are going to redevelop. There's a whole lot of offensive depth, which is great. Points leagues players that are going to value pitchers, those are going to get pushed up a little bit. But it's a very deep draft and a little bit top-heavy.
All right, no surprise, but history was made with the 2 LSU players in Paul Skenes, the starting pitcher, and Dylan Cruz, the outfielder, going 1st and 2nd overall, respectively. So we'll start right there. Let's talk about Paul Skenes, 1st overall to the Pirates, 21 years old, right-handed pitcher, 6'6". This is a big dude. He averaged 98 miles per hour on his fastball. He's got this nasty slider. He won SEC Pitcher of the Year honors, led NCAA Division I in strikeouts, K per 9 and whip. So he's awesome. He looks like he's going to be obviously a great pitcher. And I've read the best pitching prospect since Steven Strasburg. Welsh, do you agree with that? And what's the upside here? When can we see Paul Skenes potentially with the Pirates?
Yeah, I agree. I think he's just one of the, I got to be honest with you, maybe it's more of a proximity thing. Maybe I just don't have Steven Strasburg back in my mind, but it's like of recent history, it's the best pitching prospect I've seen and watched. He's insane. 80 grade fast. So the fastball is really interesting because there's this big thing on Twitter that happened today where there's a group of people, and it's going to maybe show up in some of the Stuff Plus things, that they were talking about like the shape of his fastball. And essentially what it ended up being is like, there's not a lot of difference between the horizontal and vertical movement of the pitch. So it's like a 2-seam that'll like, sweep across the zone, but I guess it would call like dead. It like flattens out a little bit, but it's 102. and he commands it. And that's like the weird thing. So all I'm getting at is like people were arguing like, well, I don't know, the shape of it and blah, blah, blah. And college hitters just couldn't attack the fastball. So are the secondary is really that good? Well, Lance Brozdowski, as he always does, he's just a monster. He did a really great breakdown, and he actually had some analytics that some of the stuff is really hard to find, especially in the college area. And he had Driveline Stuff Plus. The fastball, even though the shape issues out there, had a 132 Stuff Plus number, according to Driveline Stuff Plus. His slider, which, by the way, listen to this, dude, 66% swing and miss percentage. 66. It's because people couldn't figure out what to do. Everyone was trying to do the thing with the fastball, and I do think it made the slider good. I also love his changeup. I saw his changeup in the back half of the year. It had a 56% swing and miss percentage. Again, a lot to do with the fastball. Some of this might come down. Those numbers are gaudy. Major league players will probably have to figure out some of this stuff where college couldn't. But the slider also had a 122 Stuff Plus. So that is his top two pitches that he uses the most are 22 and 32% above average. That's what the Stuff Plus metric is. And I think that changeup is totally workable. Guy had a 15.3 K per nine last year, a sub 1 whip, 209 strikeouts. And he commands. That's like the thing. Like there's a guy I might talk about later, like Rhett Lowder. He does not have amazing stuff. He has this awesome changeup, but he commands. I love commanding. And if you watch the College World Series, you saw Lowder and Skenes go up against each other, and it was like, who's going to break first? And they had to get out of the game for anything to happen. Skenes is phenomenal. He's a big-bodied guy. The two biggest worries are the workload he had in college, and then this shape of the fastball, and if things kind of degrade down. But, man, like, he could, if they were really in contention, they're like 8.5. I was saying this on the broadcast tonight because they really wanted to hit that point. Like, it's not impossible to get this guy to help you today. The Pirates are 8.5 out. If they made a run and they were really, that's like acquiring a top end of the rotation type of pitcher or a top end bullpen arm if they wanted to do it. I think it's next year. If anything, if I'm the Pirates, I'm not letting him throw this year. I'm just cutting down the workload overall, but we'll see what they do. It's a generational talent. And I know pitching kind of stinks in fantasy and there's no such thing as a pitching prospect, but man, I'll take him top 2 or 3 in first year player in whatever format because he's that freaking good.
Again, that is Paul Skenes. And you mentioned the Stuff Plus on the fastball was 132, right?
Yeah, 130. That was a Driveline Stuff Plus 132.
Okay, so just to put this in perspective, and it might be a little bit different across the platforms, Driveline versus Stuff Plus, which we have on Fangraphs, which comes from Eno Saris. To put it in perspective, Spencer Strider's fastball is 145 Stuff Plus, and then second among qualified starting pitchers is Garrett Cole at 126. So if those things are even close to comparable in terms of Stuff Plus, then Paul Skenes has like one of the best fastballs already entering baseball. So and
you don't need numbers, by the way, to like, those are all just like quantitative things to like confirm. If you watch him, you're like, yeah, what is this? He definitely is confident. The other thing I'd say, I didn't mention this, but like he had one of the higher, and Lance Brozdowski mentioned this. I just want to keep mentioning him because you should follow him. He's a great pitching breakdown guy. But I thought it was interesting when he mentioned the amount that he sits in the zone, his fastball's in the zone, is above league average, is above major league average. That'll be interesting to see how he approaches that, because as you go up against much better hitters, you might not want to sit in the zone, but the reason he does it, because this guy is so confident in that fastball and just pumps it past you. He's a very, very unique player that I would bet on. And, category league guys are going to probably take him one in first year player, and I'm just not going to disagree.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned a name a few times here, but might as well let everyone know where they can go to follow Lance Brozdowski. That is at Lance BROZ on Twitter. The next two names, I wanted to mention, obviously, look, Dylan Cruz, second overall to the Nationals in this draft, 21 years old, a right-handed hitter. We're talking a plus hitter with plus power. He just led LSU to the College World Series championship. And let's just kind of pair him up with Wyatt Langford here, who went fourth overall to the Texas Rangers, another 21-year-old outfielder, right-handed hitter. They're both around 6 feet tall, 6'1". Welsh, who do you like better between the two when it comes to Dylan Cruz and Wyatt Langford? What are the differences between the two as well?
I love Dylan Cruz. Now, I do think there's an argument that you could fantasy-wise, statistically, think that Wyatt Langford actually might be the better player. He had more stolen bases last year, hit more homers. He walked more than he struck out. This is Wyatt Langford. Big batting average, 65 power grade, 60 hit tool, and everything like that. So you could definitely make that argument. The one thing I look at with Cruz, because Cruz is my answer here, is I think this is one of the highest floor players. So like worst case outcome with Dylan Cruz, I think he can be like Brian Reynolds, who he could have been playing with. There's some crazy. It's so funny. I wrote this down, and then I saw this video where someone was doing the comparison as well, and I was like, okay, cool. This is confirmation, because you see a lot of like the batting average. He doesn't walk as much as Dylan Cruz. The patience, though, that I think the floor is like you're getting like a Brian Reynolds type of player with the ceiling going through the roof. He didn't run a ton in college last year. Only 6 stolen bases, hit 18 homers, but I do have some metrics for some of these college hitters. His max EV was 112.8, which is pretty good. Anything over 110, we're excited about. 115, we're like, whoa. But he had an average EV, Frank, of 95.7. That was the highest of any of the college hitter data I had. And he had a 90th percentile EV of 109.6, which I believe was also the highest. So I think the floor is crazy there for him. I think Cruz, I hope he steals a little bit more. I think he can. I think he could be a 15 stolen base guy. I think he could get 25 to 30 homers. He can hit over 300. He's a middle of the order guy, where Wyatt Langford, I think, is probably like a number 4. Maybe he's a 25-25 player. I think batting average might struggle a little bit more and have more strikeout issues with Cruz. But like in points leagues with not striking out and those categories, Cruz and Skenes are 1-2. I have Cruz just across the board as my number 1. I want to make that bet, even though you can argue for like more power in some other spots. Guy scored 100 runs this year. It was obviously LSU. Tommy White hitting behind him was a reason, but 100 runs, 70 RBIs. He was nuts. He had a 4, 5, almost 7 slash. Whew.
Yeah, crazy stuff there with Dylan Cruz and Wyatt Langford. Welsh, would you say that they compare better than, we've seen a few other right-handed hitters come out and be like top 3, top 5 overall picks the past, 5 years or so. Names like Spencer Torkelson and Andrew Vaughn and Henry Davis. We know Henry Davis came out as a catcher. Now he's playing outfield. But do you think Dylan Cruz and Wyatt Langford project to be better than guys like that?
Better than those two, or like the combos?
Just in general, like are they, I guess, better hitting prospects than like Torkelson and Vaughn and Henry Davis when those guys were coming out?
That's a really cool question, because you also had in that same class is Adley. You had Adley, Torkelson. I'm talking about that class, by the way. It was like Adley, Torkelson, and Vaughn all there. And I remember I was like, if Adley were not a catcher, I would probably have valued him over all those guys. But I had Torkelson and Vaughn both as like top 20. And I have both of these guys in first year player overall fantasy. My prospect list, this is me, how I do it. I've got Cruz as a top 5 already, and I've got Langford as a top 15. So I think Vaughn's power wasn't as prestigious. It definitely wasn't as prestigious as Langford. I do think Torkelson and Langford are closer. I think those two are kind of closer. And Dylan Cruz is just a different player than them, that I rank higher than all of them. So yeah, I think it's like a little bit high. Hindsight, if you put Adley there, like Adley, Cruz, those are actually a little bit more similar than the rest. So yeah, it's in that same class. I would just, maybe it's proximity, I would probably value them a little bit more.
All right, next up, we had the 2 high school outfielders in Max Clark, who went 3rd overall to the Detroit Tigers, and Walker Jenkins, who went 5th overall to the Minnesota Twins. Looking at Max Clark, we're looking at a plus hit tool, plus speed. Sounds like evaluators think that he can grow into 20-plus home run power as well. And then Walker Jenkins here, this is a big dude, 6'3", much bigger than like the other hitters that we've talked about so far. Strong bat speed, power to all fields, based on what I read at least. Welsh, what do you think about these two? Max Clark, Walker Jenkins. Obviously, they're a little bit further away. They're 18 years old. We're probably looking at like 3 years down the line from now when we'll probably see them in Major League Baseball. What do you think of these two? What do you like better between Max Clark and Walker Jenkins?
I could see Matt. One thing I want to point out, it's funny you say that. Today, Jackson Holliday just got promoted to Double-A. And I just want to point out,
it's true.
1 year ago today, that kid was the #1 overall pick out of high school and was kind of one of those where like, man, he was kind of popping up and crazy, and he's hit AA. So we don't want to go quick and say it's 3 years anymore because
That's fair.
I mean, dude, he's going to be up next year. He's going to be up early next year. This is July 9th, and he's going up to AA. I'm not saying he's going to go to AAA. I think he's going to the AFL, and I think he's in contention early. So back to your question. And the reason I kind of did that was because, like, I think Max Clark is special. I think this is a very, very special guy. Over his high school career, hit over 500, had 88 steals. I believe only 16 total walks in 82 high school games. That's absurd, crazy. The hit tool's there. He can run. There's some power's probably the furthest thing behind, but there's still power numbers in there. I'd said this on the Sports HQ, man. I love his approach when you watch him. He can change. Like, this isn't a kid I think that is like always just trying to mash and smash for power. I just think he can hit across his body to go opposite field. He can get the swing big and loopy if he's going to try to pull it. And he can even short side it. And some of that might be like pitch recognition. Some of that might be just approach and where you are at the at-bats. But he's just like a super competitive, smart kid. I think he's 5 tools. He's a really hard worker. He's into analytics. This is a great guy to bet on. This is why the Tigers everyone thought was going to go with college, but this is a great guy to bet on. Nothing against Walker Jenkins because I said this. I don't know if you heard when I said it on the broadcast, but like all these guys are kind of small. All the projected hitters I had only like 4 guys that were over 6'2", which was crazy. It ended up being a few more because Ralphie Velasquez went, but Walker was that. He was that big physical guy. I didn't even realize this until not too long ago, but he had a hamate injury. So one of the reasons he was kind of back is he didn't play a lot of circuit baseball this year. So teams didn't get to scout him as much, but he's got a beautiful swing, huge power, big hit tool, just a big physical projectable body. I heard Carlos Collazo on Baseball America comp him to maybe like an Austin Meadows, which is kind of fun. For better or for worse, you could take a look at it like that. But, the injury stuff kind of sets it back a little bit. But he's a guy to dream on for huge, huge power. But I'm pretty enamored with Max Clark.
Okay, so when you were talking about the Austin Meadows comp, that was for Walker Jenkins, right?
Walker Jenkins, yes.
Okay. Do you have, just putting you on the spot here, is there like a player comp that you've either heard or come up with yourself for Max Clark, who is, also the younger 18-year-old outfielder here?
So, okay, that's a good question. I'm trying to go into my little brain here for a second and try to think about it because it's a high speed, high contact where I think the power could go back a little bit.
You know what I heard them say on the broadcast, and it's like it's always hyperbolic to compare players to like these young superstars already.
They do the Bo Jackson stuff. Yeah.
No. They did Corbin Carroll for Max Clark.
That's interesting because when he hits across his body, there's something. I'm looking at some names to try to spark me here. Okay, I do actually have one for you. I'm gonna say no. I actually don't know if I particularly love that one, but maybe a Bobby Witt. Bobby Witt's in the infield. Like statistically, I think it could go there. He might be able to hit for a little bit more average, but you know how it's speed over power for Bobby Witt. I think that makes a little bit more sense, but maybe it's a combo somewhere in there between. I just don't think Max is that good of a hitter as Corbin Carroll, but I do think there might even be a little bit more like raw pop in there. Also, go look at Max Clark. He's a quad dude, man. Like he is like quad for day. He's a gym guy. He is going to build and grow that body. Though they may look similar now, I don't think in like 5 years Clark is going to look like Corbin Carroll. That's a fun one. I could be wrong about it, but I'll throw like Bobby Witt at you.
Yeah, no, I was watching the MLB Draft on MLB Network, and they were interviewing him, and I heard you say like he's poised and he's competitive, and yeah, he's 18 years old, and he was up there like on TV just talking and super confident. And I was like, yeah, this guy seems like he's got it.
Well, dude, he's got like he's a big media guy, so he's got like a YouTube channel. Yes. When I was at the combine, there were like there was I don't know any of these guys. My kid knew, but there's like a fitness YouTuber that was there. And then there was another film crew that was just walking around and doing like Instagram and YouTubers, like 2 different crews. And then he also was interviewed by Jared Carabas for DK. So it's like, this is a big media guy, huge Instagram following. And, I don't think the limelight is too much for him, but he also is out there being like, it's not getting to his head. He's already said, he's going to work harder than you. He's going to work harder than everybody. He studies analytics. He works on his body. He's trying to optimize himself. Now, could that get into your head and get screwed up? Sure. It's baseball. Those are the type of things that can mess with you. But I don't know. Those are the type of guys you like to bet on. It's a really smart high school kid, and he just went 3 overall. I'm very much into Max Clark. But, he's further away than the rest of these guys unless he's the next Jackson Holliday.
All right, let's take our first break, and when we return, we'll talk about some other big prospects. I know ones that, Welsh, you are higher on than some other people in the industry. We'll do that right after this.
In 3, 2, 1.
How you doing?
Run, Forrest!
Run, Bernie.
So fetch.
Yay!
Life moves pretty fast. If you don't stop and look around once in a while, you could miss it.
Welcome back into Fantasy Baseball today. And before we get back into the MLB Draft, I just have to mention, I understand it was a crazy weekend of baseball. Like, Elly De La Cruz is unreal. I know we talk about him all the time. People might get annoyed about how much we talk about him, but how can you not? With what he's doing, right? It's not just we're hyping up a prospect that came up. He's living up to the hype, man. It's been crazy. Stole second base, stole third, and then stole home in the same inning. He stole third. They threw the ball back to the pitcher. The pitcher turned his back. Elly De La Cruz stole home. You just don't see stuff like that. It is crazy.
You know what I loved? I loved the camera shot too that was on his face when he was moving around third, because you could see, and like I didn't realize this the first time I watched it. Yes, that's it. Like if you just watch it one time, you just see him like it looks like he just looks over, reacts, and runs. But what you can see is that guy is like working it in his head. He's looking, like he's purposely not looking in the direction, and then he just go. It's like a beautiful no look behind the back basketball pass he did to put on what is arguably one of the most exciting plays in baseball. That guy is something else. That guy is something else, man.
And he is trending towards, dare I say, he's only played 30 games. I think he's going to be a first-round pick in fantasy next year, man. It's hard to say. Like, we got to see how Elly De La Cruz ends the season. Obviously, he could go on a slump. He's a very young player. I get it. But the talent, along with just the fun factor, the hype factor that is Elly De La Cruz, man, I think that's going to push him into the first round of fantasy drafts next year. But let's see how he kind of finishes out in the second half. Speaking of, young players that have been awesome, we mentioned his name just recently. Corbin Carroll. We started Friday's podcast. We're like, oh, well, it might be the end of his season. He's in the lineup Friday. Like, what is happening?
I might have got a couple tweets, Frank. But it was so funny because someone tweeted me and they were like, is this the biggest overreaction of all time? And I was like, well, you didn't watch the play then. If you're asking that question, you didn't watch the play, because you have to know the history. Yeah. Torn labrum, had the injury, torn labrum 2 years ago, then hurts himself a week ago. Then that swing back, we all were collectively like, this is done. This is over. And then you got the little tidbits. He walked back into the dugout. Torey Lovullo says, you know what? We're getting some encouraging stuff. Then the day of. It's actually better than you guys think. He did radio. Torey Lovullo did a couple hours before that game. And the Dave Burns, the guy that interviewed him, said, is there a possibility he plays today? And Lovullo just started hemming and hawing and being like, I don't want to say not. And I was like, oh my God, is he going to be out there? And then he was out there. I will tell you, terrified I've been. I don't think it was the best decision. I want him to be healthy. But then he goes out and he has a walk-off hit to win for the Diamondbacks, I think, on Saturday night. And he's next level. And you know what? Thank God he's healthy, regardless if you're rooting against him because I like him or whatever it is. Corbin Carroll and Elly are great for baseball, and we should have these really fun rookies just keep going here. And I'm really, really glad. I absolutely overreacted, but it's because I love him. It's because of love, my friends.
Yeah. So look, it was good to see. I do agree that it was a little bit scary. I think the prudent move would have been to just sit Corbin Carroll out through the All-Star break and whatever. Hopefully he comes back this weekend, but he was back and he was hitting well. I think he, stole 2 bases on Friday. It's the guy
played every day off of that, by the way, played even today, which was wild.
Yep. And the Tigers, they had a combined no-hitter against the Toronto Blue Jays on Saturday, which was pretty impressive. Obviously it's a great feat. Matt Manning combined with Jason Foley and Alex Lang. So that was cool. That was the second no-hitter of the season. Obviously, the first one was the perfect game with Domingo Germán, and then the Tigers pulling that off on Saturday. So cool stuff there. Let's get back into the MLB draft. And Welsh, we know that bloodlines have become so popular in the past decade or so with the sons of former pro players making such a big impact on the game in fantasy baseball as well. And we saw another one drafted 6th overall with Jacob Wilson going to the Oakland A's. He's the son of former Major League shortstop Jack Wilson, who played many seasons there with the Pittsburgh Pirates. Jacob Wilson, 21 years old, a shortstop. He's 6'3", and based on what I read, one of the best pure hitters in the nation. He only struck out 7 times in 275 plate appearances this past year. I don't know if that's college and Cape Cod League combined, whatever it is, but 7 strikeouts. Talk to me about Jacob Wilson.
Yeah, oh yeah, that might be something. I wonder if that is something else included, because I had 5 on there. That was the number that I saw, but the college, they get weird with it. I mean, it was a under 3% K percentage, which was absurd. He actually played here locally, Grand Canyon University, one of the big local kids out here. He, to me, is going to be a rubber meets the road with real draft to fantasy. Because one thing I want to point out, you said this a little bit earlier, and I know we'll kind of get to it, but there is a difference between like how I rank a player versus the fantasy, because that is how I am ranking them. I'm ranking them to fantasy. So, you know, you might see a Baseball America rank a player in a certain way. Well, that's for real life stuff. Mine is for fantasy. So you're going to have alterations, and you're going to see fantasy people rank these first year players all over the board until we really start to get eyes on these players, kind of see how they perform, because this is just the guess. And Jacob Wilson's going to, my whole point of this is he's going to be the weird one, because he's not great for fantasy. Well, he might be good for points, but not for categories, because Jacob Wilson is a monster hitter, 94.5% contact percentage. And I have a short sample size of college analytical like at bats that I can give you. And in that 94.5% contact percentage, 94% contact of 92 an hour velo and above. So that's a crazy number of like high velo stuff, which means he can get on top of it. The problem is there's just not a ton of power. He had a max EV of 102.7. He's kind of a big kid, but he had 6 homers this past year. He doesn't steal a lot of bases, which is kind of my problem. But he hits. He hit .418, had a 600 slug, but there's just no real projectable power. And you can kind of just see that in the high contact percentage versus really low max EV. So this is going to be one of those guys that I don't know if he's going to have a good barrel rate. He'll probably hit for high average. Kind of like a Luis Arraez. He's a much bigger player, 6'3", but now he's going to the A's, and God knows what's going to be surrounded by him. So though he went 6 overall, I don't have him in my top 15. In a points league, I might put him up, because I do think, again, he'll hit a bunch of singles and he's not going to strike out. So I might raise him in a points league draft, maybe borderlining first round if you're like a 15 type of league, which I guess you wouldn't. That's more of a roto thing, but 12 to 15 maybe if you really want to push it. But otherwise, I've got him, like I said, outside my top 15.
Again, that is Jacob Wilson, the son of former Major League shortstop Jack Wilson. And it appears after that, we get into a trio of pitchers that were, all ranked similarly-ish with Rhett Lowder, Chase Dolander, and Noble Meyer. Lowder and Dolander were college pitchers. Noble Meyer, a high school pitcher. Lowder went to the Reds 7th overall. Dolander went to the Rockies 9th overall. And Noble Meyer went to the Marlins 10th overall. They just continue to stack up on the pitching there. They've done a great job developing pitching prospects. And we're seeing that at the major league level now with Yuri Perez and all those guys. Welsh, talk to me about these 3 names: Lowder, Dolander, and Noble Meyer. What do we need to know about them, and how do you rank those 3?
Well, I mean, I loved Dolander. I don't anymore. And I don't mean to be like so stereotypical about it, but it's just Colorado ruins these guys. They absolutely ruin. I mean, they took Gabriel Hughes, I think, in this past draft, who's okay, but like Dolander at one point was going to be the number 1 pitcher taken, and he just fell apart with command this past year. And him going to Colorado just really just sours me to it. And I really did like him. A big fastball, got big whiff rates. His slider is really, really interesting. It can kind of cut a little bit more. Had a 37% swing and miss rate this past year in college. But he had over 4 ERA. He was just kind of all over the place. But it's Colorado. It's trash. I love Rhett Lowder. This is a insanely cool destination because of how and what they do with pitchers. It's not a good fastball. it's an incredibly good changeup, and he's a command pitcher. And you guys all saw, if you did watch a College World Series, you saw Skenes versus Lowder, and neither one of them bend. Neither one of them want to do it. Lowder can go deeper into games. They controlled him a little bit more with his innings. I think it's a really great destination, especially if they can end up developing a bigger fastball or a better fastball. It sits 92 and a half, or 92 to 95, something like that. But the slider, I think they can improve on, and the changeup is a huge pitch, and he commands. Like I said this on the broadcast, it's almost George Kirby-ish. It's just Kirby has a better fastball, but it might be similar results. Noble Meyer, I love. He's one of my favorites, but he's a high school pitcher. So I think he could be the best non-Skenes pitcher out of this class. I think he went to an incredibly great organization. They also took a 2nd-round pick in Thomas White. They literally are walking out of this draft with the best high school righty and the best high school lefty. That's what they ended up doing here. Noble Meyer is a stud, can hit triple digits on the fastball, huge power slider. He's super smart. He's 6'5", projectable, but he's high school. So, most fantasy people are probably not going to want to rank him high. You might not want to take him, but if I'm in a league that has extra value to pitchers, I'm trying to get Noble Meyer, and he might be a 2nd-round available pick. I really, really like Noble Meyer.
Yeah, and obviously, look, it goes without saying, an 18-year-old pitcher, there's just so much that can happen between now and the time that they, hopefully make it to the major leagues. The one thing that I thought was pretty interesting about Noble Meyer, he's from Jesuit High School in Oregon. They also produced Mick Abel, Phillies pitching prospect, who was drafted, very early a couple of years ago too. And so I just thought that was notable that they created another major league big name prospect in Mick Abel. So hopefully Noble Meyer can kind of follow in those footsteps and continue to develop there with the Miami Marlins. 4 college bats that I know you like quite a bit, Welsh, are Chase Davis, Matt Shaw, Tommy Troy, and Enrique Bradfield, at least based on the first-year player draft ranks that you sent me. Chase Davis kind of, he was a little bit lower down the actual prospect rankings that I saw. Maybe you could talk more to that, but he went to the Cardinals 21st overall in this draft. Matt Shaw went to the Cubs 13th overall. Tommy Troy went to your Arizona Diamondbacks 12th overall, and Enrique Bradfield to the Orioles 17th overall. I know, there's different varying skill sets here. And they're all college bats, right? Yeah. So
all college bats.
They're all pretty close in proximity too. If you want to go one by one, feel free, break them down. Chase Davis, Matt Shaw, Tommy Troy, and Enrique Bradfield Jr.
Yeah, I'll do some quick ones. By the way, I'm going to be insufferable because the Diamondback 2nd-round pick, Frank, is that player we talked about that hadn't been drafted, and I'm going to lose it. So let's start with Chase Davis, because I have Chase Davis really high, but I will tell you, the fantasy community, I think, is going to be more with me than they are real life, because you were talking like the real life ranks is like 18 to 25 or something like that. This is Chase Davis, outfielder out of U of A, but we all really like them. He's got some incredibly fun data as well behind the scenes. He had a 108.4 90th percentile exit velocity with, of all the, this is the 2nd highest, I think, of all the college bats that went in the first round. Let me see if, no, actually, you know what? Of all the college bats I have data for in the first round, no one has a higher max EV than Chase Davis at 115.6. He also had a 15% walk rate, which was higher than a K percentage. He was almost a 3.57.8 slash guy, 371 average, 494 OBP, 761 slug this past year. 80% contact rate. He doesn't chase, which is crazy good. I just love everything about him. Harold Reynolds, give him credit. Sometimes he gets people get on him about like Bo Jackson comps and stuff, but he had this comp he was working with all draft long about Carlos Gonzalez and how the swing is very similar. He said, and it is identical, right?
Dude, I saw the swing, and even before they said the player comp, I said Cargo.
Yep.
I said Carlos Gonzalez immediately.
The way he ends the at bat too, the way his legs move, he told the story about how Carlos Gonzalez then reached out to Chase Davis and they spoke about it, which is such a cool thing. And some people, Harold Reynolds being the number one, believe that this might be the best hit tool in the draft. This might be, and he thinks he's the best hitter. I love Chase Davis. Results are there. Big hard hit stuff. Doesn't run a whole bunch, which I wish he would do. Cardinals, that was the destination. The 2 infielders I have very high on my list in Matt Shaw and Tommy Troy. Tommy Troy going to my Arizona Diamondbacks, but I have Matt Shaw higher. He ended up going to the Cubs. I love this guy. This is another one of those when I dug through and having some data-driven stuff, he was one of those guys that just ended up popping. Average exit velocity, almost 93 miles per hour, had over 110 on the EV. Also, pretty big launch angle in college at 20. I think that's the third highest of all the college guys I have. Didn't strike out a bunch, 3.47 slash again, and he's a great defender. Tommy Troy goes to the Diamondbacks, and he's going to be, they listed him as a shortstop. This is another one of those guys. He had a 92.5% contact inside the zone and a 114 max EV. Only reason I mention that, sometimes those high contact guys lack some of the power. Well, that is the second best of all the college bats I have, contact percentage in the zone, and a 114 max EV, which is like crazy big power numbers. So I love Tommy Troy. And then Enrique Bradfield is the complete opposite of all these players, because this is the fastest guy in the draft. Hands down, bar none. Will he hit for power? That's going to be the big ultimate question. But this is an 80 grade speed guy, huge defender, makes tons of contact. He does hit across his body. But man, if there, with the track record the Orioles have right now of developing these guys, if there's a team that can optimize him, if he can hit 10 to 15 homers, this is a guy that can steal 60 plus bases. I mean, this could be the good side of everything we talk about with Estoy Ruiz. You know what I'm saying? Like high batting average, going to score 100 runs. He's a leadoff type of player. He led off with Vanderbilt. I love Enrique Bradfield. Just a little dicey on how you're going to go with it with fantasy, but I do have him ranked pretty high. Love all those guys you picked. Those are all like probably my core Welsh first-year player guys that aren't Dylan Cruz.
When it comes to Matt Shaw and Tommy Troy, I just noticed, it might be more so for fielding. I just noticed they were a little bit lower on actual prospect lists. Is there any reason that Welsh, when it comes to Shaw and Tommy Troy? Is it maybe the size? I know both of those guys are under 6 feet, or maybe the fact that they played for lower level of competition. Matt Shaw, University of Maryland, Tommy Troy at Stanford. Look, obviously still Division I colleges, but it's not the SEC. Do you have any concerns when it comes to Shaw and Troy from those regards?
I mean, I think Shaw is built to be the second baseman. He had a couple big highlight reel players. They are both a little bit shorter, stoutier type of guys, like that old Dan Ugla. I don't know. I kind of think like Justin Foscue. Tommy Troy has a very Justin Foscue-like build, a bigger upper body, shorter, kind of thicker guys. I think it's possible they both end up as second baseman. I don't know how their arm is going to rate out at the majors, but again, I do want to point out, specifically with Tommy Troy, they listed him as a shortstop. And the only reason I was thinking about that, a lot of rumors about Dylan Cease, Jordan Lawler out there. Diamondbacks need to make moves.
Really?
You just wonder. Yeah, there's a rumor going around. I've seen, and I got confirmed this weekend, that there's at least chatter that, Jordan Lawler could be out there. And what better way to kind of confirm yourself if you were to make a big, massive move? Not saying it's going to happen or anything, but if you were to do that, then get yourself a shortstop of the future, which they just got a college shortstop. But I don't think these guys are like shining defensively like some of these other players, but I don't think it's anything that takes them off at least the middle infield.
When you were talking about Matt Shaw and him being like a stockier, he packs a punch kind of guy, I saw the player comp they gave him on MLB Network was Matt McClain for Matt Shaw. So
McClain's a little bit taller, but I see that.
Cool. Anything else? I guess just general things before we get into your first year player draft rankings. Like any clear winners that you have so far, just from I guess a pure baseball perspective. Any winners, any losers from the MLB draft from what you've seen so far.
Yeah, so going through, I think the Rangers. It doesn't matter what else they did. That they got just from talks I've had, just to let you know, like. They didn't think they were getting Langford. I don't think that was much of a conversation. There was a time I think they thought that Dylan Cruz might get to them. Then they were kind of relenting to Max Clark, knowing that Skenes wasn't getting there. So I said this on the broadcast, Frank. I kind of associate, how like in preseason we'll be like, all right, the best pick to have is 3. Because if you don't get one of the top 2 guys, you get the best of the next crew. Or if there's 4 great players, we kind of did this year. What was it like? Acuna and Julio Rodriguez, and then we had a couple of Judge and Turner. And you'd be like, well, 4 is great because you get the last, but if you take 3, you get a choice. Well, they were 4, and you would think the last piece would be Max Clark. They got handed a guy that was almost a number 1 overall pick. So I really think the Rangers, whatever else happens, it was such a phenomenal spot. You guys are going to hate it, but like the Diamondbacks getting Gino Grover and Tommy Troy just gets me all hot and excited because I'm a big Groover guy at NC State. I love the Cardinals taking Chase Davis. There's just some really good homes here. I guess I'd have to look through the rest of these. There's not a lot that I hated. I didn't love the Royals first pick. I don't really like what they're doing actually in general, now that I'm looking at this. But the Marlins are the other one I mentioned. Having Thomas Wyatt and Noble Meyer is bonkers. It doesn't feed fantasy quite as much. And then I just noticed this, the Nationals, oh man, got Yohandy Morales, who is a huge power third baseman who played for Miami. He's got big strikeout issues, but he's a huge bat. I really, really like him. So now they just paired Dylan Cruz with Yohandy Morales. So that's another, Washington is, that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, that does sound pretty awesome for them. Let's take our final break, and when we return, we'll get into the Welsh's very early first-year player draft rankings for Dynasty Leagues, and we'll do that right after this.
Get breaking news,
Big news coming out of the NFL today.
highlights, and instant reactions.
The largest final round comeback in tour championship history. We're down to the final four.
I just want to take time to analyze greatness.
Talk winners and losers with a guy who's already a big winner.
CBS Sports HQ. It's all sports all day long.
Welcome back into Fantasy Baseball today, and obviously when you're listening to this, it's on Monday, July 10th. The Home Run Derby is later on tonight. Welsh, do you have a pick for the Home Run Derby?
Yeah, I actually was going through some stuff. I'm going to give you my boring pick first because I have two picks. My boring pick, especially if I'm making bets, I'm going to bet both these players. My boring pick is Pete Alonso because nobody knows how to do this like Pete Alonso. Pete Alonso is built for this. He has a system. He could probably teach classes at the end of his career if he wants on home run derbies. I don't bet against Pete Alonso. If I'm making another bet, I was going through and tried to it's just a crapshoot. What do you do? I was trying to find maybe some little edge. And I started to look at hard hit percentage and barrel percentage. What analytics could we possibly look at that help us? At the end of the day, probably none of them, probably barrel percentage even less. But I did find something that I like. I was looking at players that had a 50% hard hit percentage and a 15 plus barrel percentage. And I found two players, Randy Arozarena and Adolis Garcia. And the guy that had the higher barrel percentage and not the highest hard hit, which might be what you guys would want to pick, was Adolis. No, actually, it is the highest hard hit percentage, if I can speak, was Adolis Garcia. So I'm going to go with Adolis Garcia with the hard hit and barrel. And actually, Randy has dropped under 50% for the hard hit percentage. So Adolis and Pete Alonso for my picks. What say you?
I don't have anything to back this up. I've just got a feeling he's performed well on this before, and I think he can get it done. I'm going with Vlad Jr., and I hope that this is something that can help him propel into the second half, because obviously it's been a disappointing first half, specifically in terms of the power, but I think it actually happened a couple of years ago. Well, maybe it was Juan Soto who it happened for, but there was someone who showed up to the home run derby and they hit a bunch of home runs, and in the second half, they were awesome, and they just started hitting for a bunch of power.
So you don't believe it ruins these guys at all?
No, I think that's kind of like an over. I don't know. Is that real?
I agree. I think it's
or like some kind of fallacy, right?
Like a 1 hour thing completely changes a guy's approach. I don't know. It's probably like the Madden curse or something. MLB The Show curse. It has that much validity to me.
I know Towers has made this point before, and he's like, a lot of the times the players who compete in the home run derby, they're guys that are kind of overachieving anyway in the first half of the season, right? So he's like, oh, they kind of just regress to where they should be in the second half, and then people kind of blame it on the home run derby curse. But I don't know that I completely believe in that. Let's go, Vlad. That's what I'm going with. Let's get into your first year player draft rankings for Dynasty Leagues. And before we actually mention the names, Welch, how much do you factor in landing spot when it comes to these guys? Because I was talking to a buddy of mine, and he's like, oh man, I think I'm just going to take Skenes if I have the first overall pick, because I don't trust the Nationals to develop Dylan Cruz. And I'm like, yeah, but Dylan Cruz is already awesome. So I don't know that there's much development that needs to happen here.
Yeah, I mean, I think it all plays a role. I kind of told you before, I want to pay attention to landing spot. A prime example was I had this infatuation a couple years ago with Khalil Watson. And then when Khalil Watson fell, I was just kind of like, why did we fall? Why did he fell past Marcelo Meyer? He fell past Jordan Law significantly. And then the Marlins took him. And I was like, did the Marlins develop hitters really well? So that kind of brought me back down, and I think that's paid off. Sure, I've done this as well with my current list. I just want to see, I have an initial list I have months and months prior. how off am I? How right am I? You know, if I have a guy that's really high up and they fall, does that tell me something? And then obviously think about landing spot. I mean, the Angels don't develop players. They just take, you know, as close to the majors and throw them up. So like, I don't think a lot about Angels guys. And I think it's enough to consider, but like, if you were weighting it, like talent is the most important thing with small weights to like, where did they go? Noble Meyer, get a little bit of boost in that organization and positively or negatively, or get a negative push down. So it all plays a role for sure.
All right. So drum roll, please. Let's jump in. The top 3 in your first year player draft rankings. No surprise. All 3 of the big college names up top: Dylan Cruz, Wyatt Langford, Paul Skenes. Well, so if you're just ranking these guys in terms of proximity, who do we see first in the majors? How would you rank those 3?
Paul Skenes. I mean, Paul Skenes will be the first one up. I think it's Skenes, Cruz, Langford. I do think the Rangers, I don't know, I feel like the Rangers have taken a little bit longer to develop. They're kind of slow rolling a little bit. There might be something where it's, you know, Kamar gets healthy and Jack Leiter, they sent him up to AA, but maybe they're going to slow roll him now that all these guys come up. I think he's the last. I think Cruz and Skenes are potentials for this coming year. I really, really do. Well, it'll be interesting to see what they do with Cruz, if he just goes like high A, double A, and then he's competing out right out the chute. Might be good for the, you know, Nationals to think about. If you let Dylan Cruz break camp and he is up in the Rookie of the Year awards, you get an extra pick to redevelop that system. They actually should. Same thing can be said for the Pirates with Paul Skenes. I think both of those guys are in contention to come out early next year, but maybe some of how they're treated this year is going to tell us a bigger story. But proximity is Skenes, Cruz, Langford. Value, bringing back maybe just a notch on pitching, trying to get the 2 college bats. That's why I have Langford over Skenes. But like I said, if you want to change the order, I really don't care. I just personally value Cruz as he's like tier 1, and then Skenes and Langford are the next tier.
All right, fair enough. 4 and 5 in your rankings: Max Clark and Walker Jenkins, the 2 high school outfielders there. And then the next 4, 6 through 9 in your first year player draft rankings are the college bats that we spoke about that you are pretty much higher on than I guess the rest. And that's Chase Davis, Matt Shaw, Tommy Troy, and Enrique Bradfield in that order. We spoke a lot about those names. 2 names we haven't mentioned yet: 10 and 11 in your rankings. Colin Houck, an 18-year-old shortstop who was actually drafted by the Mets 32nd overall. I think he was ranked like 10th or 11th on MLB Pipeline, so he fell quite a bit in the draft. And then Jacob Gonzalez is a 21-year-old shortstop. He went to the White Sox 15th overall. What do we need to know about those 2 Welsh? Colin Houck and Jacob Gonzalez.
Well, I mean, Houck is one I am considering. Like, there were rumors, everyone mocked him going to the Arizona Diamondbacks and not falling past 15. And then before the draft, there was like this tiny little rumor that maybe he was falling. So I was wondering, what's going on? And was this a signability issue? Could it be a signability issue? Are the Mets going to overslot pay? I just don't know what the situation is. So that's what I'm going to monitor, and that might change. But he's like a really great 5-tool player. Jacob Gonzalez was also one of the really highly sought after bats coming into this year, early on in this year, mid last year. His swing gets a little bit open. He can hit across his body. I don't know where the power's going to go. He's just a really solid hitter, but he's got kind of a bigger open stance, a little bit more whippy. So I like him, and I think he's more of a proximity guy. That could be something like him and Colson Montgomery are playing together soon, especially if this team is going to end up maybe, you know, derailing some of these pieces like Tim Anderson. But Colin Houck is the one I'm going to like check in on with some people and see if I want to keep him there. It's just because then you're starting to get into some of the high valued pitchers, and there's a few other hitters. I'm a little torn on my valuation, but like the 5 tools with Colin Houck, he could really be an impact player.
12th and 13th in your FYPD rankings: Noble Meyer, the high school pitcher who went to the Marlins, and Rhett Lowder, the college pitcher who went to the Cincinnati Reds. 2 names we haven't talked about yet: 14th and 15th overall, Brock Wilken, 21-year-old third baseman to the Brewers. He went 18th overall in the draft. And then Kyle Teal, a 21-year-old catcher. He went to the Red Sox 14th overall. Welsh talked to me about Wilken and Kyle Teal.
Yeah, Wilken is one I've continuously been moving up a little bit more and more. He's pretty fascinating. One of the bigger, you could argue maybe it's a 70 grade power tool, hit just a ton of homers. He also walks a ton. He ended up having, let me find it here. for Brock Wilken. He ended up having a 21% walk rate to a 19% strikeout rate while hitting 342. He had a 500 OBP and an 800 slug. He also had the lowest of all of the guys I have here chase rate at only 10% in college last year with an almost 95 average exit velocity. One of the bigger, higher guys, and he goes into a, good power hitting organization. Wilken is one of those guys I want to boost up. But I'm also dealing with like strategy with a guy like Kyle Teal. Kyle Teal was kind of changing his profile, becoming a little bit more comboed hit and power tool. I just don't know if he's significantly fantastic, and he's a catcher. And I don't know if I'm enamored with him. He's one I could push down a little bit. Love the destination going to the Red Sox, but Wilken and Teal. Wilken is definitely a potential riser. Teal is probably going to sit like right outside the first round for me, but pretty good power hit tool and might even move off of the position, which would make him a little bit more valuable.
16th in your rankings is Chase Delander, the college pitcher who went to the Rockies, unfortunately. So he is just fall down a little bit down the list compared to where he was at a couple of hours ago when you first sent me this list.
Yep. Hate Colorado. Just hate it.
Yeah, no, we know for years, and we know the deal when it comes to people pitching in Colorado there. The next four are all middle infielders-ish. Some of them might wind up at third base. We've got Braden Taylor. He's a 21-year-old who went to the Rays. Arjun Nimala. He is a 17-year-old shortstop who went to the Blue Jays. George Lombard Jr., an 18-year-old shortstop / third baseman who went to the Yankees. And the aforementioned Jacob Wilson. He was the college shortstop, son of Jack Wilson, who went to the Oakland A's. Welsh talked to me about this group: Braden Taylor, Arjun Nimala, George Lombard Jr., and Jacob Wilson.
Braden Taylor is interesting because he was a third baseman at TCU, and he was announced as a shortstop for the Rays. So that's really fascinating. He good contact across the field, learning to hit for power, but it's really just pull power right now. I don't know. Some people are more enamored with him than I am, but he's a pretty solid across the board. He was given 55 hit, 55 power, just overall solid. I just don't know if anything jumps out where this is that high school thing. Nimala and Lombard, I both really like. Nimala is a big physical shortstop who has really big potential power if all of the hit tool things combine, where George Lombard is another one of those guys. But, I think on the broadcast, they had likened like a comp of like Marcus Semien. I told you off air, I kind of got like even George Springer vibes. Yeah, I think there's like a physicality thing that looks similar to that. He's a guy that maybe moves to the outfield. I can see that leadoff type of power. Maybe the stolen bases are going to go as he ages and grows up a little bit. Both of those guys have sky high potential, but it's just, we don't know like how they're going to develop, how the organizations are both going to push them. That's Toronto with Nimala, Yankees with Lombard. And I've already talked about Jacob Wilson. Like, he might deserve to be much higher with that hit tool. It's just so empty in other spots. I don't care that he went 6. He's just valued a lot less than the rest of these guys.
A pitcher that we haven't talked about yet who went to the Atlanta Braves is Hurston Waldrop. And he is an older pitcher, right?
I played at Florida. Yeah, a college pitcher out of Florida. Yeah, this is a great destination for him, by the way,
absolutely.
Going to the Braves. I love it. He's got a devastating splitter. That's the big thing. He's got command issues, though, but this one was like all about the splitter, and that's what you're banking on, which, for better or for worse, is that going to be something anyone's going to really be excited about? That it's like the old Casey Mize stuff, but it's a big power pitcher, big fastball, splitter just absolutely destroys through the zone. He's just got to make it visually look like it's in the zone and it breaks out for big strikeouts. Command issues are probably the biggest of any of the pitchers we've talked about, but the Braves do it. There's a part of me that's like, as soon as he got picked, I was like, boy, could this be the Spencer Strider school? Put him in relief. He's splitter fastball with one secondary, and he just comes up sooner rather than later. That organization has told us they do these things. If they fix the command early, Waldrop could be a guy that pushes really, really fast.
4 final names here, 22 through 25 in your first-year player draft rankings. Aiden Miller, a 19-year-old who went to the Phillies. Gino Groover, 21-year-old who went to your Arizona Diamondbacks. Nolan Shanwell, a 21-year-old who went to the Angels, and Colt Emerson, a 17-year-old shortstop who went to the Mariners. We're all over the place here, Welsh. Starting from 17 up to 21, what do you got on these names?
Yeah, so Chanel was one of those I was saying, like, I don't know, Angels, it's a college bat that maybe they just push in big power. There's some power in there, pretty good hit tool. I wasn't enamored. I had him in my 20s going into this. Lou James, that's the nickname. Gino Groover, I love him. I'm higher than anybody else on him. High contact percentage, contact in the zone, one of the better. I think only 2 guys I have registered higher. It was Tommy Troy and Jacob Gonzalez. So, I mean, the Diamondbacks definitely had a play here. He had one of the highest 90th percentile EVs at 107. He walked more than he struck out. He hit 333 with a 431 OBP, 536 slug. I loved him out of NC State. He was just one of my favorite guys. Who are the others that we just mentioned? Aiden Miller. Aiden Miller is a total steal. Total steal. High school bat. Last year won the high school home run derby against Miles Naylor, one of the Naylor brothers. Huge, big power, great circuit player. Kind of surprised he was there. That was a fantastic get for them. And yeah, I think that finished out the guys we were talking about. Did I miss anybody?
Colt Emerson. Did you talk about him?
Solid. I actually think I heard Jim Callis comp him to like a Cole Young. I think there's a little bit more power in there. Seattle took him shortstop. They took a bunch of high school guys. They took Ty Pete as well. Emerson's fine. I think he's an average player kind of across the board, maybe more hit over power. He can steal some. This is just a solid bet on a high school shortstop, but they're starting to gather those guys with, like I said, they just took Ty Pete and they've already got Cole Young.
All right. The top 25 in the first year player draft rankings. I just combined the word draft and rankings. I was going to say drankings, but they're first year player draft rankings.
Fun. I could go for a drinking right now. Honestly, Frank.
Yeah, I bet you can. That's for those who play in dynasty leagues. Last question here, Welsh. So we know Dylan Cruz, Wyatt Langford, Paul Skenes. Those are probably the 3 closest in terms of proximity. Yeah. Give me 1 or 2 names outside of those 3 that you could see maybe making an impact as soon as next year.
Rhett Lowder definitely would jump to my mind, especially this team is trying to compete. They're trying to do it quick, and now they moved Andrew Abbott up. Maybe they send him to high A, and then maybe he finishes double A, and they push him really hard this next year. If you got Lodolo good, Abbott, Hunter Green, Rhett Lowder, I think Lowder screams as a player that comes up pretty soon. Looking through the rest of the list here, I mean, Chase Davis's bat play. Hunter Waldrop, that's the other one. I mean, I think the Braves could absolutely shove him to the majors. As long as the command isn't a massive, massive issue, they are looking for those arms to go. So Waldrop and Lowder, no shocker, it's pitchers. I guess if you were looking for something more fun, if you were looking for a hitter to go in there, probably Jacob Wilson. Jacob Wilson might be able to be a face of that. I think he's going to just hit and hit and hit. I just don't know if any of the other tools would be there. So it's going to be a matter of like, will the A's want him to develop the other tools, or will they say like, let's go? Because this is defensive ready now type of guy, and maybe the bat's ready just without a few of the tools fully developed. So I guess if I'd pick a hitter, I'd go Jacob Wilson.
All right, there you go. The MLB Draft first year player draft rankings as well. Tomorrow, the Welsh and I will be back. We'll be streaming a little bit earlier than usual, probably 6 p.m. Eastern time around there, so we can get that out to you before the home run derby starts. And we'll be talking second half impact prospects for this season, guys that you could pick up and stash now and potentially making a big impact down the stretch. And then later on in the week, Scott and Towers will be back, and we'll be talking early 2024 mock draft, the first 2 rounds. I know that's always a fun one that we do around this time of year. And we'll also take a look back what happened in the first half of the season, some trends, what's going on in baseball, batting average trends, stolen base trends. How is everything kind of going right now so far this season? And then we'll take a look at the second half, and we'll do a preview. Sleepers, breakouts, and busts, names that could be on the move on the trade market in real life baseball. So all that kind of fun stuff. We'll be doing that all week here throughout the All-Star break. We're going to wrap there. For the Welsh, I am Frank. Thanks as always for tuning in to Fantasy Baseball today. Please make sure to follow and leave a 5-star rating on Apple or Spotify. We'll be back again tomorrow. Bye-bye.